Every journey gets us closer to the same truth. We all need connection.
You are watching In Conversation This Week with Micheál O'Hurley.
This is Micheál O'Hurley, and you're watching another episode of In Conversation This Week. We have with us today our honored guest, Ukraine's ambassador to the UN, Sergiy Kyslytsya, an experienced diplomat, and we want to thank him for joining us at this very busy and dangerous time. Mr. Ambassador, welcome.
Yeah, hello, how are you?
Mr. Ambassador, I saw one of your tweets on the 10th. You wrote to the Secretary General of the UN, if I'm not mistaken, to talk about Russia's decision to restrict freedom of navigation in the Sea of Azov in the Black Sea. What is the UN going to do about this problem, knowing that China is also looking at it to see what they might get away with in the South China Seas? Is the UN going to tackle this?
I think it is the overall responsibility of the United Nations to maintain peace and security and to work very hard within its charter and conventions to prevent any threat to regional and global security. There are plenty of mechanisms starting from the Security Council and going down to the conventional mechanisms that should and may be referred to when there is a clear threat to navigation and to the security in the national waters or economic zone. Therefore, so it's only my duty to bring attention of the Security Council and of the Secretary General to the fact that the Russian Federation was at that moment effectively shutting down significant part of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. In case of the Sea of Azov, it was particularly dangerous because they were effectively closing down the Strait of Kerch, and that would prevent any vessel from entering the Sea of Azov. Therefore, we do it very straightforwardly. We send a diplomatic note or letter addressed to the Secretary General and to the Security Council to bring that to the attention of the bodies concerned, and we also put it on record that it is, in our opinion, in violation of the international law and the law of the sea.
Mr. Ambassador, we've had these problems before with Russia restricting navigation. What's your personal opinion here and that of your government? Is this a blockade of Ukrainian ports, or is it the naval exercise Russia says it is?
I think it is a hybrid thing, and we live in the hybrid world altogether, be it peaceful life, be it military operation. And I think technically any country has the right to exercise military exercises, military drills, but if they are done the way the Russians do, that is basically shutting down the entire Sea of Azov or blocking practically everything in the vicinity of the Ukrainian major ports in the Black Sea, and especially again the backdrop of what's going on along the borders with Ukraine, with the military buildup. We can't really see it as if it is just yet another military exercise. You know, the Russians are very elaborate in the way how they harass countries. We can recall, I'm not really an authoritative source for information, but I do remember what happened a fortnight ago when the Russians wanted to have a military drill, naval drill in the economic zone of Ireland. And I think that the timing and the way it was planned was not by chance. So I clearly understand why the Irish fishermen were so worried, and the Irish public in general was very worried. It was not really necessary at that moment, but from how I saw it from New York, it was a clear case of harassing the Irish government and the Irish population.
It's very interesting, Mr. Ambassador, because in 2009 they conducted a similar drill in Ireland's exclusive economic zone, created a large oil spill, denied it for so long that it effectively couldn't be treated. So it had a real impact not only on fishing, but Ireland's beaches. And I have to say that Ireland and France worked together very effectively on that issue. And your own ambassador here in Ireland, Ambassador Yurasko, was very active on that point, and it had a satisfactory, if not a happy, resolution in deferring it from the Irish waters. I want to talk about yesterday. It was, I believe, the anniversary of the Russian attack on Debaltseve. They've launched so many attacks against Ukraine. Why was Debaltseve so important?
Well, the Debaltseve was very important for many reasons. First of all, it was a key strategic point for communications. It was a very clear example how the Russians did not honor their commitments because it happened very close to the dates of signing major protocols on ceasefire and on withdrawal of the forces. It was done deliberately because nothing happens when it comes to Russia by chance. Of course, the Russians, in their daily life, they're quite careless. But when it comes to the things like military operation or military action, it doesn't happen by chance. It was a deliberate decision by Putin himself. And the months of February is in general very, very complicated because the months of January, the months of February. The months of February is very complicated months. Let me remind all of you that the 20th of February is officially the date of the beginning of the occupation of Crimea. So it was all around the same dates: 17th, 20th, Debaltseve, 20th of February, occupation of Crimea. Then, if we speak about New York, it is the dates when the infamous resolution 2202 on Minsk Agreements was passed by the Security Council, and it is differently interpreted by many sides. Even the translation of that resolution in Russian is different from the original in English.
So, Mr. Ambassador, I've been a negotiator before. You're a lawyer, I believe, too. Why did such a clumsy instrument get crafted and have any expectation of durability? You could look at that document 5 different ways in any different line. It's really at the crux of the problem, isn't it? Russia interprets it vastly differently than almost the rest of the right-thinking world. What are your views on that?
Right, the Minsk Agreements, first of all, it is a package. It's a complex of at least 3 documents. So Russia tends to cherry pick from this package what they like. Russia also insists that they are not party to the obligations under the Minsk Agreements. If you listen what the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister said yesterday in the Security Council, he said clearly, we are not party to the Minsk Agreements because there is not a single obligation in the text of it. But the Russians are playing the game because if you look who signed the every single Minsk document, it was signed by the Russian ambassador, plenipotentiary, Mr. Zurabov, ambassador, full-fledged ambassador of Putin at that moment. So if something is signed by an ambassador, and you know it very well from your previous background, and you know that the letters of credentials say, trust this ambassador as you would trust me. So basically, the Russian signature under the protocols and memorandum, they are like signatures of Putin. So there is no way to run away from that signature. And also, the fundamental point is that there is this total disconnect when it comes to the way they are read, those documents. The Russians read them one way, Ukrainians read them another way. The French and the Germans are not ready and not willing, rather, to join the Russians in their way of reading. So I think it's not the first time that the Russians cherry pick the international documents, and especially political declarations and political agreements. Because let me remind you that the Minsk Agreements were never ratified neither by Russian parliament nor by Ukrainian parliament. And the Russians insist that they are legally binding by virtue of the resolution of the Security Council 2202, where the resolution says that the Security Council endorses the package. But you, as an English speaker, you know that endorsement doesn't make something mandatory, especially because endorsement of the United Nations over the decisions not taken under Chapter 7 of the Statute of the Charter is a very questionable thing. But the crux of the issue is not even that. The crux of the issue is that no matter how we read the package of Minsk, there is not a single hard evidence, except of many verbal riddles and semantic games that the Russians are serious about implementing the list of agreed things.
So, Mr. Ambassador, we have Kyslytsya, who it's an attack that occurs within a week of Russia signing those agreements. Clearly, there was no intention to abide by them, let alone keep them. Then we have continued breaches of the ceasefire. Everyone continues to point to the Minsk Agreements as the basis for resolving this conflict. Is that still the view of your government? And how can that be in light of the fact that Russia has never performed any of its obligations and in fact denies that it has obligations?
Well, it's a good question, Michal, but look, me not being an English speaker, I would say it differently. It is a basis for the resolving the conflict. It's not the basis for resolving the conflict, because Ukraine is open to many, many ways, and we are willing to sit down with Russians at the level of the presidents, at the level of foreign ministers. We said many times that we would like to sit down in Vienna, have discussions in the United Nations. So legally speaking, there are many, many existing formats and opportunities that are not on paper. So yes, indeed, the Minsk Agreements are among the probable ways to resolve the issue. In fact, even not being implemented, the Minsk Agreements did play an important role back to 2015, because in the first 2 years after they were signed, there were some attempts to implement and the most serious and more meaningful engagement of the Russians, but nothing happened since then. I mean, the last summit of Normandy 4 took place in December 2019, and ever since the parties were not able to reach the point of satisfactory implementation of what was agreed in Paris in 2019.
Mr. Ambassador, there was a briefing on the Minsk Agreements, I believe yesterday or the day before, at the United Nations. I understand that some of the partner countries to Ukraine were prohibited from speaking to the issue because of the rules and the format in the UN. Do you think the UN has created an environment in which they can make informed decisions while Russia dominates the forum through the Security Council?
Michael, there are so many questions in your question, and it would take many, many hours to give a proper answer. Beginning with the existential nature of the situation, we can ask ourselves, and we can ask the membership of the United Nations, is the United Nations as it stands in 2022 does meet the requirements of the current century, as it was conceived in Yalta and then in San Francisco in 1945, how it was designed seemingly to protect the world from new wars, but if you ask my private opinion, to protect the global powers in decades to come from taking too much powers from them, because the world 1945 and the world 2022, those are entirely different sets of realities. So, of course, there are skeptics who say the United Nations is useless. But are those skeptics ready to suggest that we should establish something new? I mean, something more operational? All right, let me give you an example. There was a commission on the human rights in Geneva, and in early 2000s, the governments realized, oh, it was not really working properly. Let's create something else. And they established the Human Rights Council. And everybody was so happy. They said, oh, now we have the Human Rights Council. We designed something new. It will work. It will meet the expectations and the standards of the new century. They established a body in Geneva, the same city, the same membership, the same chambers, the same set of rules, the same set of countries, the same set of problems. And now they say, why in the world the Human Rights Council doesn't work? So if someone tells you that we have to cancel altogether the existing system, the United Nations, have a new world conference and establish something else similar to it, it will not work. It will not work until every government diligently implements the charter, and the level of hypocrisy in the United Nations is beyond precedented. So can governments take informed decisions? Yes, they can. Every government has enough capacity to absorb information should the government is willing to receive information. Therefore, the meeting, I will start first with the meeting of the Security Council on January 31st. The meeting on January 31st was fundamentally important because we insisted, and partners insisted, that the Security Council, as the primary body at global level responsible for security, should receive first-hand information about this super transatlantic hype of diplomacy from the first hands, not from CNN, not from Sky News, not from Irish television, but from the first hands. And we said, let's have this meeting, let's have the Americans, the French, the Ukrainians deliver information to the membership of the Security Council. So if there is a need later on to take a decision, they would take decisions not based on CNN or BBC or Sky News, but on what the governments responsibly delivered to them. So the briefing on Minsk Agreements yesterday on the 17th, initiated by Russia, by irony, is also a useful thing. I mean, the initial reaction of many, why the hell we should go again? It's an annual event, in fact. It happens every year. So the initial reaction by many, oh, why the hell we should go and listen to the Russian narrative? Once again, we all know the Russian narrative. But on the other hand, why not to review what happened since the last meeting? Why not to let the Americans, the Ukrainians, the French, the Irish to express themselves what is their position? And I was quite satisfied yesterday with the strengths of the position of the majority of the Council. The very fact that the Secretary of State Blinken found it necessary for him to stop by New York, specifically to go to the Security Council and to deliver his speech in person, testifies to that effect. The statement of the Irish ambassador was very strong. It was unequivocal. I mean, it was the very clear set of messages coming from Ireland. And you know yourself how Ireland is prudent when it comes to international peace and neutrality, bridge building, diplomatic tracks. Nevertheless, it did not prevent the Irish ambassador from delivering a very strong message. So I think that the Security Council still able to act if the membership is diligent.
I believe next week there's another debate. It might be a bit more expansive. When is it? What's the format? What do you expect from it?
Indeed, we have an annual debate in the General Assembly. It's not the Security Council debate, it is the General Assembly. It is an annual event on a separate agenda item that is called the situation in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. And it is very important because it provides, we were just speaking about the Security Council, right? And the need and our duty to inform the Security Council membership. But now we speak about 193 countries, members of the General Assembly. So it is the best way to inform 193 countries about the position of my country, United States, Ireland, European Union, and others on the issue of the occupation of temporarily occupied, sorry for repeating, territories of Ukraine. It happens annually. It happens in a manner that it's a full day debate. So anyone who is willing to take the floor takes the floor. And what is important that it happens against a very clear position of the Russians to prevent it from happening. Let me remind you that to preserve this agenda item on the agenda of the General Assembly, we need to have a vote at the end of every annual session of the General Assembly with a recommendation to the next annual session to keep it. Then the Russians use the General Committee to block it. They fail. Then when there is a first day of the new session, they again ask the membership to block it. In fact, we get more votes in favor of preserving this agenda item than we get votes when it comes to the General Assembly resolutions on Crimea or militarization. Because for many countries, it is fundamental to preserve this right to speak, to be heard in the General Assembly, because there are many countries who are afraid that a next victim can be them, and that today they are safe, but tomorrow they may like to go and speak in the General Assembly. So it is a very good exercise, and I think that in a manner it is a parliamentary, so to say, dimension of the United Nations, because the General Assembly is like Parliament if we project that at a national level.
300 million years ago, there was no Africa, Asia, Americas, or Europe. Just one big supercontinent, Pangea. And today, there is still a force connecting those divided by distance, reversing millions of years of rifting. Making far feel close, bringing there to here. Turkish Airlines.
Russia has occupied the former USSR's seat on the Security Council. In fact, I think they made their own sign and glued it to the wall, declaring the Russian Federation as the successor to the USSR. I'm not an expert by any measure, but my reading of the law is that once the USSR ceased to exist, at least at the United Nations, their seat on the UN Security Council also disappeared, despite Russia saying that they're a successor state by obligation. That isn't binding on the UN. Does Russia deserve a seat on the UN Security Council, and is there an appetite to really look at this issue?
Well, it's a very, very complicated question. It deserves a workshop, if not colloquium, of lawyers to explore it and to research it. But let me tell you a couple of things. If you open Charter of the United Nations, there is Article 4 of the United Nations that clearly reads, membership in the United Nations is open to all other peace-loving states. So it is already conditions the membership. So the United Nations can only accept peace-loving states. So I can immediately ask you if Russia was a peace-loving state in the 90s and in 2000s. Remember the wars in Chechnya, remember occupation of Transnistria in Moldova and other things. So if we continue to read Article 4, then it says the admission of any such state to membership in the United Nations will be affected by a decision of the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. So you may ask the Secretariat of the United Nations, based on the Article 4, if the UN Secretariat is in a position to provide you with copies of the recommendation of the Security Council or of a decision of the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. I can guarantee you that in 1991, there was no decision, neither by the Security Council nor by the General Assembly. So the next question is, what happened in 1991? The Russian answer is that there was a meeting of the leadership of the former republics of the Soviet Union in Almaty in December, the 21st of December, where 11 republics decided that they would agree, including Ukraine, by the way, that they would agree that the Russian Federation, it was still called the Russian Soviet Federative Republic or whatever, not the Russian Federation, that the Russian Federation would be a state continuator when it comes to the membership in the United Nations. It's very important, not the successor state, but continuator. Why? I will tell you later. We are all successor states to the USSR, except the Baltics, who say we're not successor states. because we were occupied. So we cannot be successors to the occupier. But legally speaking, all republics of the Soviet Union are successor states because there is a body of treaties, there is a body of property and things like that we succeeded. So the Russians said, we are not, when it comes to the membership, we are not successors, but we are continuators. So what they did, they wrote a letter to the United Nations. It was both a letter of the representative of the Soviet Union and the letter of Belarusian ambassador. Why Belarusian ambassador? Because Belarus was a member of the UN. That there was a decision in Almaty, things like that, that countries decided, blah, blah, blah. Well, but first of all, only 2 out of 11 in Almaty were members of the United Nations at the moment of the meeting. Only Ukraine and Belarus. Even the Russian Federation was not a member. Now, Turkmenistan was not the member. Tajikistan was not the member. Kazakhstan was not the member. So it's basically like was a decision by someone who was not the member. So they wrote that letter and said, we are going from now on the continuator of the Soviet Union. All right. In my opinion, being a lawyer by education, is that I received this letter, right? I go to the legal counsel and I ask the legal counsel of the United Nations, can you please draft the legal justification for our reply to that letter? And if this letter merits for drafting decision by the Security Council that would recommend to the General Assembly, according to Article 4 of the Charter, to say, all right, we agree with you. So that never happened. So what Russians say, someone agreed in Almaty, and you should just take it as a fact. In this case, let me tell you, imagine a country in the European Union splits, a member of the European Union splits, right? We would not say the names because it may be very politically controversial, but imagine a country in the European Union splits, right? And part of the country, a new country, basically, writes to Brussels, you know, guys, we decided that we will be members. So call us X instead of Y. Will European Union say, all right, we agree, just continue? Imagine NATO receives a decision from a third party that says we decided to be not NATO members. Imagine any organization that would say, all right, we take account of your decision, we bypass our statutory documents, it's fine. So the thing is, Michal, that I may reconsider my legal reading of the situation if the UN Secretariat produces on my request or your request a piece of document, not a paper, not notes, but a piece of paper, a document that says that the requirements of the Article 4 of the Charter were met, and that the person X, Y, and Z signed a reply that constitutes a legal document that they accepted the desire of Russia to be considered a continuator. If you have such a document, let's continue our conversation. I haven't seen that kind of document,
Mr. Ambassador, you only underscore, I think, the world's belief that it is time for reform, serious reform in the UN, that is more reflective of today. I mean, at Yalta, there were countries making decisions about other countries who weren't at the table, whose voices weren't heard. And today, it's something we wouldn't accept. So, again, the UN Security Council, by all measures, has become dysfunctional and unproductive. The veto is used to preserve power, not promote peace. So, do you think there's an appetite for a conversation about reform after this crisis is over?
Let me be the advocate, not of the devil, but of the United Nations. It is fundamentally wrong optics to see the United Nations only through the prism of the Security Council. The United Nations is a very, very powerful body when it comes to a long list of services the UN provides to almost 200 nations on this planet. The scale and volume of humanitarian assistance that is provided to the most desperate nations is incredible. There is neither the European Union, nobody is able to provide legally, transparently, that volume of assistance. It is not by chance that rich countries and the European Union, as a union, ask the United Nations to be a player, a deliverer on the ground. You know, especially in the situations where a flag of UN is more acceptable than the flag of NATO or the flag of European Union. So we should not really undervalue the service of many, many people, thousands of people who work hard every day in Sudan, in Yemen, in DRC, in Colombia, in Haiti, everywhere. The Security Council is only the most scandalous, so to say, the most sexy part of the family, but it is not all. I mean, the the flagship operation of the United Nations is peacekeeping, and there are a good number of ongoing peacekeeping operations, and I can responsibly say that we would have bloody wars if there were not the UN peacekeepers present on the ground. And yet, there is this veto right. You're right. The veto right prevents many necessary decisions, especially on Syria, in the Security Council. But Security Council does deliver many important issues. And that is why I believe the Irish government, many, many years ago, decided to run for a Security Council seat. That is why the competition was so tough, you know, in the Western European group for that seat. And that is why the Irish government should be praised for winning the competition. And that is why I say that my good friend Geraldine, ambassador of Ireland in the Security Council, she does a great job daily and her team works very hard. So the reform, we have more than a decade of negotiations about reform, and there are many issues of principle that prevent any reform from happening, because any meaningful reform steps on the territory of the rights of the P5, the permanent members of the Security Council. But let me ask you also, do you believe that just a mechanical enlargement of the Security Council helps to make it more operational? I don't think so. I don't think so, because in order to have a body operational, and we come back to the very beginning of this conversation, we have to be 100% sure that the members of the Security Council do respect the UN Charter, not by lip service, but by their daily ability to take positions. I would not name the countries, and I would not even name a region, that particular region, where almost entirely all countries of the region say, you know, we don't want to be between two elephants that fight. We don't want to be the grass on which the elephants fight. That is a very standard narrative. But nevertheless, they say, we are underrepresented in the Security Council. We want to have more seats there. We want to have at least 2 permanent seats in the Security Council. So let me ask you, imagine we reach an agreement and the Security Council is enlarged, and representatives of the region that firmly stands on a position that they don't want to be the grass on which 2 elephants fight, enter the Security Council on a permanent basis. Will they be able to take positions daily? Because the nature of the things discussed in the Security Council does require positioning. You can't be in the Security Council and say, oh, we are so neutral, we will take no position. Therefore, once again, not because you're speaking from Ireland, but because I see how mature the position of Ireland is, I think Ireland so far is doing a great job coupling its traditions of neutrality with their ability to take positions in the Security Council. So, to recap, will we see a decisive reform of the Security Council in near future? I don't believe so. I don't believe so because the last amendment to the UN Charter was approved in 1973, which is like 50 years ago. To amend the UN Charter, according to Article 108 of the Charter, you need ratifications of 2/3 of the national parliaments, including all P5. Imagine the length and the degree of the debates in 129 countries, that is 2/3 of the membership, to pass any meaningful amendment to the UN Charter. And that is why, when we come back to your question about the Russian membership in the Security Council, that is why I believe it is a reason, not the reason, why the Article 23 of the Charter still reads that it is the Soviet Union that is the member of the Security Council. Because to amend this article and to be able to buy in the UN bookstore a UN Charter which reads it is the Russian Federation that is permanent member, you need to pass and ratify this change in 129 parliaments. So imagine how many parliaments in Europe will say Russia is a peace-loving nation that deserves a permanent seat on the Security Council against the backdrop of what we see daily.
Mr. Ambassador, that's a topic, as you say, we could go on with a colloquy and a symposium all day long about. Let's bring this to a close. Let me paint a picture and invite your answer. Russia has been a guarantor of the Budapest Memorandum, which recognized, amongst other things, Ukraine's sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and in exchange for that, I know because I was involved, Ukraine gave up the 3rd largest nuclear arsenal in the world, put it beyond use, voluntarily. Has Russia kept its word there? Then we have the Minsk Agreement. Has Russia kept its word? Can the world deal with a Russia that continues to talk about agreements and commitments when they have a demonstrated track record of rubbishing anything that isn't self-serving to their interest. Now, that's my characterization. Can I invite your thoughts?
Russia has a long history of respecting the even signed agreements, let alone non-signed obligations, because there is a body of political commitments that is the OSCE. OSCE, unlike the United Nations, is a set of political obligations. None of the obligations within the OSCE is legally binding because starting with the Helsinki Act, it is political set of rules. Russia has a history of not complying with the international rules. You know, in the United States, and you know it very well, the way institutions and businesses are looking at you is your credit history. You may continue to exist even if your credit history is awful, but you would not be respected by businesses and by entities unless you build a solid, positive credit history. Russia will exist as long as this planet exists. I don't believe in the theories of the disintegration of the Russian Federation, although we remember the Soviet Union disintegrated one day. So it is in the intrinsic interests of the entire community, international community, and especially of the neighbors of the Russian Federation, that Russia starts building a good credit history, and that we can trust the Russians not only by their actions, but only rely on their word. So far, everyone, the president of Ukraine, the foreign minister of Ukraine, myself, the president of the United States, leadership of European countries say we need to see actions, not promises. Remember what Reagan told Gorbachev. He said, "Доверяй, но проверяй." Trust, but verify. And it remains the yardstick that we should apply when we deal with the Russian Federation.
Well, that was my article yesterday, Mr. Ambassador. There's another article that I would commend to your attention in which a forensic psychologist takes a look at Putin's background and whether this is really about NATO membership or whether it's more about his imperial ambitions. I would commend it to anybody considering dealing with the Russian Federation. I want to thank you for your time. I wish Ukraine every safety. Last question in one word. Are you open to a peaceful diplomatic resolution, even at the 11th hour?
The answer is very clear. There is no other way. Unless we are suicidal, we are open. We must be open, and we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I wish you all luck and all of the nations at the UN. It's tough work, and you'll be glad to know that this publication are internationalist. We gave the UN human rights team in Ethiopia a medal for their good work. We believe in the UN. We just like it to work just a little bit better. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. I'm Michal O'Hurley. Stay safe.